I'm always excited about the future of work because I find so much value and appreciate the dignity of work and think it makes such a difference in people's lives.
When we talk about work, I think we're all informed by what our first experiences with work was. So what was your first job, Peter?
I was a busboy and graduated to become a waiter eventually. But I learned...
You moved your way up.
I moved my way up. I learned a lot about how to treat people and the importance of being on time and, hustling. And it was work I still look back fondly on.
Yeah, my first job was working at McDonald's. Actually here in Troy. I mean, we're at the Kelly Services headquarters in Troy. It was actually just a couple miles down the road. And I think it is that hustle and also making mistakes and realizing that you have to continue on that kind of informs our first, thoughts about what work really means to us and how it kind of fits into our life. Yeah,
and learning from other people. I mean, one of the things that I found was that I learned as much from watching people as them telling me what to do. And that's a little bit something that the pandemic has interrupted to some extent because people aren't always with other people these days, like we were when I was a youngster.
Yeah, and running around as a busboy, and picking up cues in how to work together too. That has changed drastically in the workplace.
Yeah, I think there's probably some level of self-assurance by some of the newer generations about that they've got it figured out. I think in my generation, we were more, you had to learn the ropes, you had to kind of earn your stripes, so to speak. So that has changed. And the pandemic and the remote work has contributed to not having as much interaction with each other. So that's something we're working on.
Yeah, and that's something I really want to talk about, I think, intergenerationally, and how we work together and learn from each other. Because I think, older wise, we can look down and be like, oh, well, the younger generation, they're just picking and choosing where they want to go. And when we came up, it was stick to a job for as long as you can.
Yeah, the expectation, at least my generation, was you were going to get a job and you were going to retire from that company. Mm-hmm. That is no longer the case. If you have only 2 or 3 jobs and you're 30, you're doing something wrong because you should be moving around according to that generation.
Exactly. All right. So take me back. So, after your illustrious server career, you ended up going to law school and you were a lawyer. And tell us how you got to be now the CEO of Kelly Services.
Yeah. So I practiced law in private practice for about 5 years. Then I went in-house at a huge corporation, mm-hmm. Worked there for about another 5 years. And then Kelly called and asked me if I'd like to come out and build their contracts practice, which I agreed to because I went to U of M and I love this part of the country and my wife's from out here. So it was a relatively easy decision to pick up and move our family out here. It was a few years after I was working as a lawyer at Kelly that mm-hmm. our then CEO tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I'd move over to the business side, which has happened in my other companies. That mm-hmm. for whatever reason, people have asked me to move from law to business. So it wasn't that big a jump, but it was very important because then I got some experience on the business side. I ultimately went back to become general counsel, and then 4 years later became CEO.
And jumped again. And that's also a story of following a path, and you think you're on a certain path, but saying yes to different opportunities that maybe pushed you out of the zone that you thought you were going to be in.
Yeah, clearly there was, if I look back on my career, I wouldn't be CEO if I had not taken some of those opportunities to push myself, get uncomfortable, see things through a different lens. And, I always encourage individuals that I mentor or work with, coach, that you have to follow that. You have to push yourself if you're going to continue to develop and advance.
Yeah, it's good to know that you mentor people, because I think that that's something that is missing, that people don't realize that is actually very important to find a mentor. And then when you are at a position to be able to help somebody else out, that it's important even for your own skill set to go to help, to mentor somebody else.
Yeah, I think mentorship is really important, as you said, because you get an opportunity to establish a relationship with somebody, and it could be a group, but oftentimes it's one-on-one, but it allows you to become invested in somebody else, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think the best mentors ultimately become sponsors, where they become your advocate and they help you accelerate your career. I was lucky enough to have a number of mentors that became sponsors for my career.
Yeah.
I feel I have an obligation to pay some of that back.
Yeah, and sometimes as a mentor, I actually learn something. I learn something new when I'm mentoring somebody else who's coming up through the ranks.
Yeah, I think it's a mutually beneficial. I always get as much out of it. An old guy like me, when I mentor somebody who's younger, who doesn't necessarily have the experience I have, I always learn something, whether it's how to do something on my iPhone or some cultural
It always
tidbit.
Comes back to the tech, doesn't it? I mean,
yes. But you don't have to do it that way, Peter. There's an easier way to do it. So I think the value is, and we have here at Kelly, we've started a mentor program specifically for that, to allow more experienced people to contribute to the careers of some of our less experienced employees.
Yeah, as everyone's trying to make it through the world. And the reason why I really wanted to sit down with you and talk about the future of work and what Kelly is doing, and I think your wider lens of the landscape that we're facing right now. I mean, I remember Kelly Services, like my mom said, sign up as a temp when you're 18, just get in there. They're going to find you something. Kelly has really evolved the company is over 75 years old.
Yeah. We celebrated our 75th anniversary a couple of years ago. So.
Mm-hmm.
We're heading into the next milestone, which hopefully we'll get soon. But yeah, Kelly has changed a lot. It's not to use a old Oldsmobile. It's not your grandfather's or your grandmother's Kelly.
Right.
We have expanded into science, education, technology, engineering. We do light industrial manufacturing.
You're placing teachers too.
Yeah, we're the largest provider of substitute teachers in the U.S. Very proud of that. It's so important that there are instructors in a classroom. People don't realize that in your average K through 12 span, or when you're in school, 1 year of that is actually taught by a substitute. So
really,
yeah, it's really an important position. And especially in inner cities, if you don't have an instructor in the classroom, the kids are in the gymnasium watching a movie.
There's no continuity.
There's no learning. There's no interaction going on. So we feel very passionate about our education practice, because we think we're making a difference in not only the individual students, but also the communities in which they live.
So you have a very good idea of how a lot of various industries have changed over the last 5 years. And when everyone talks about this kind of buzz phrase of the future of work and where are we and what do people want with work right now, how do you even answer them? Because I can only imagine like your phone is ringing all the time. Like, Peter, tell us what's happening. What are the trends? What's happening next?
Yeah, I like to think of the future of work as an evolution. It's just constantly moving towards work as part of our lives. And like, think about 5 years ago, we got a report from a high-paid consultant about all of the jobs that were going to disappear because of automation. Well, that didn't happen. There were new jobs that were created and new ways of applying the technology for the benefit of workers. So the job market, the workplace, the workforce, the work style is constantly moving and constantly changing. And I'm always excited about the future of work, because I find so much value and appreciate the dignity of work and think it makes such a difference in people's lives. So I am clearly a half full when it comes to work and the changes that are going on in the workplace.
Yeah, I read somewhere that you looked at how your mom modeled that for you. Can you tell us that?
Yeah, so at a very young age, my father basically left my mother with 4 young kids. I was the youngest at 6. My oldest brother was 14. And he left her with no money, a lot more debt than anything else. She had to sell our house in a fire sale. We moved into we rented an old house with 1 working bathroom. There were 5 of us, and somehow she figured out how, she never worked outside the home, but she found ways to work, to put food on the table. She cobbled together a bunch of part-time jobs trying to be a mom, but did so successfully, and ultimately started her own marketing company that she retired from when she was in her 80s.
My goodness.
And
no rest for her ever.
No, she was, I fondly remember we lived close to a train station where she would take a train to New York City, where we lived in Connecticut, every day. And I can recall looking, I think it was a snow day or something, but looking at the train platform, and there was a sea, this is back in the 70s, a sea of men, and my mother, who was amongst them. And it always gave me a great sense of pride that she was able to hold her own at a time when women were just beginning to establish themselves in the workforce.
That kind of also, you say, dignity of having work, and also the flexibility is something that I think we're all still craving and trying to find the balance and the flexibility. What's the value in a job that can give that for people?
Oh, it's huge, especially, I think probably more so in the more recent generations. The work-life balance, it's more of an integration of work into your life as opposed to trying to figure out how to manage your life around work. And so flexibility, the opportunity to spend time with family, raise a family, take care of an elderly parent, take training courses to support your development, having hobbies and other vocations are all
having
things,
a life outside of work. It's
really important. And I think people see it as wanting to invest in their whole self. And so flexibility at work, be it hours, be it location, be it schedules, are all very important to try to achieve that elusive work-life balance.
Yeah, the balance is never easy. I feel like I'm letting somebody down on one end or another sometimes, but I think that's just what we all deal with. I think when we're seeing this younger generation of Gen Z, they're saying, I want that balance, I crave that balance, and that's not a weakness. Where I think sometimes the philosophy of our older generation, and I'm going to say, my generation, is that must work hard all the time to prove that we're working and that we are valuable. What are Gen Z teaching us in the workplace now?
Well, I think it's a contrarian view to that view that you have to always be on. You have to be seen in the workplace. You have to 24/7. That's the symbol of a hard worker. I think Gen Z are showing that that's not necessary. It's really about the contribution you make to an organization.
And being able to measure it, though, too, right?
Of course. And I think Gen Z is maybe challenging don't tell me I need to work 40 hours. Measure my output. Let me show you the great work that I do and hold me accountable for that. But don't necessarily insist that I'm here on Friday afternoons when I want to go mountain biking. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a change of mindset that's really healthy.
We hear actually so much about how there are job openings or there's companies that cannot fill and that they're constantly looking for good talent. What are employers looking for right now from your perspective?
Well, I think they're looking for the capabilities and skill sets that you'd expect in 2023. They're looking for people that are have a high degree of EQ or emotional ability. They have an ability to work and adapt to diverse environments. They're technology savvy. So companies are looking for, I think, greater levels of adaptability and agility in their employee base than maybe they did certainly when I was coming up through the ranks.
What about someone who is older and trying to get back into the workforce? How should they change or adapt, or what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question because we have seen something we call ageism in the workforce, which is pretty much barriers that exist for people that want to come back maybe into the workforce after a timeout or feel that they have to for financial reasons. And I guess my advice to them would be, don't try to be Gen Z. You're not.
That's not you.
That's not going to work. But try to connect with all of the generations in the workforce. We established, since I become CEO, we now have 8 what we call affinity groups or resource groups. These are groups of like-minded people that around whether it's gender, ethnicity, could be sexual orientation, but they're communities that somebody who is re-entering the workforce could be part of and get to know the younger generation, get to know the culture and the work style through these affinity groups. So I think it's really important that the folks in my generation come back to work, but do so in a way that they don't give up their roots.
And let's do the flip side then. We have a lot of grads coming out in 23, and there is still this perception, and even in Michigan, that some recent polling saying that people don't believe a college education is worth it at this point. But we've got these grads out here who are now looking for the jobs. What advice would you give them in terms of how to show up and start that search?
Yeah, I think I'm a big proponent of 4-year degrees. I think there are probably, in some cases, it's not necessary to have a 4-year degree, but that's kind of a different topic perhaps. But I think the recent grads, I would encourage them to not get on the ladder and assume that that's going to be the last employer they work with, that they should try things out. Working with a company like Kelly is a great way to get exposure to a lot of different companies and industries. It's not for everybody, but I think trying to find what is meaningful to you, because I found, and I think the Gen Zs in particular, want some purpose in their work. So finding that alignment, not only why are you doing, or not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it, is really important. And just try a lot of different things, talk to a lot of different companies, and gain exposure.
It's interesting that you say we'll want to find purpose with their work. Are you seeing that companies are responding in kind, that they're taking stances on social issues? They are being more flexible in terms of hiring as well, knowing full well that people do want to find that purpose with the company. It's not just a job or what our grandparents did. You punch in and punch out for 50 years. Yeah,
the recent generations, they want to know what their company is doing and that it has some meaning to them. And I think that's really important for customers or companies to focus on what we call the employee value proposition. So what environment are you creating? What is the connection you're making with each of our colleagues around what their purpose is? Are you answering or speaking to it? Are you encouraging them to find that connection and then tap into their commitment and passion and put that to use on behalf of the company? I think that's really an exciting ingredient that Gen Z brings to the workforce these days. Is
passionate more, I guess, more important than salary even?
In some cases, yeah. Our research indicates that more so on quitting as opposed to being attracted. One of the key indicators is the flexibility we talked about before, even more than pay. So I think the connection to purpose, the connection to flexibility, the work environment, having an inclusive work environment is very important to the Gen Z, feeling like not only are they welcome, but that there is a welcoming environment that others can prosper in as well. All of those are important.
And the hybrid workplace is here to stay. I know that a lot of companies were already doing this even before the pandemic. The pandemic forced a massive shift that many companies probably would have never done were they not forced to do it. But it feels like now that for many, this is it. This is what we're going to be working with.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. We actually started something we called Kelly Anywhere in 2016, where certain individuals with their manager's approval could work anywhere. And it was very successful. We did it as a retention tool, attraction of high quality individuals. So when the pandemic hit, we were already experienced.
You were right in place for it. Yeah.
We just had to accept the fact that now everybody could work that way. And it worked very well. And we continue to get feedback from our employees that hybrid, flexible work style is very important to them, particularly younger parents who, find a benefit of taking 15 minutes to meet their child at a bus stop,
and then get right
back to work. It's and I think that's great.
The next big disruption that we're looking at, AI. Have you had conversations about how ChatGPT and those kinds of tools are going to be changing the way I think a huge swath of middle-level work can be done?
Yeah, I think I think we're just cracking the surface of how ChatGPT and other generative AI is going to impact work. But as I said earlier, I'm an optimist. I think there's going to be more benefit that comes from probably reducing the amount of less meaningful work so people can focus on things they really enjoy. At least that's my hope. But ChatGPT or the other platforms, they are going to impact certain job categories pretty clearly. And I think the trick is to embrace it and accept it and try to work with, if it's an existing employee base, upskill and reskill and find other things that high quality individuals can do to contribute to an organization's success.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is that let it do the dirty work. Let it do the simple, like the note writing, the certain things that graph things and, take care of some of the simpler stuff so there can be the larger thinking level that we can work with and maybe put our resources in a different way. Peter, when you looked 5 years down the road at Kelly and being able to satisfy, people who are looking for work and the companies that need to plug, people in. What do you think about and what's the next wave to come for you?
I think focusing on workforce planning for companies to take into account not only the talent that they need, but also the introduction of technology. We introduced something we call the digital worker, which is basically technology that's designed to alleviate some of the redundant work. We work with a company, they are onboarding 700 people. We have tools that help facilitate the onboarding of people so somebody doesn't have to go through that chore. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking to companies about. And I think the future of work is something that you need to be talking about all the time, regularly, because if you're not, for example, using generative AI, you're already behind.
Yeah. All right, Peter Quigley, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Christy.
This was a really great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Let me ask you real quick, though. You have kids.
I do.
And so were they like, oh, great, now the guy who's the head of Kelly Service is going to be telling me how to get my next job, like that first job out of college, directing my career path. Were you able to keep hands off on that?
Yeah, I didn't interject myself very often. Occasionally I would hear something about, a resume or something. Maybe I should take a look.
Might want to think about this on a good one.
I did what I could.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's good to see you.
It's very nice to see you as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.